Putting up signs saying Meek is free. There were hugs, pictures, and then this. He rung the bell to cheers. Meek was sitting courtside with Kevin Hart and Ruben to watch the Sixers as they closed out the series. Here's Ruben and Joel Embiid on what his presence means.
He belongs here. I mean, he should have never been in jail to start with. As soon as he was out, it was like, I'm going to come with the Sixers. We're going to close it out tonight. And it was destiny.
When he was in jail, I went to visit him, and he wasn't feeling good. You could tell he was trying to hold on. So I was just excited that he got to witness this, because I know that he's always representing the city, and he loves this city so much.
All right, for more on this, let's get you back to First Take.
Wins and losses. I call last night a win. Philadelphia's own Meek Mill in the building last night. The Wells Fargo Center was lit. Stephen A. and Max were also there. Stephen A., but what is this whole Meek Mill situation really all about?
Well, first of all, it's about the fact that in the state of Pennsylvania, it now has the highest rate of citizens citizens under probation or parole supervision in the Northeastern United States. It's a problem. Probation, parole violations, what have you. You got folks that are being kept in jail for showing up to court late, for crying out loud, and you hear news about them violating their probation and spending months upon months of time in jail. But if you violate your probation in any kind of way, if you eat the wrong foods, or you sit up there and you show up to court late, or if you've traveled, like you can't travel out of the state of New Jersey but you go over to Cherry Hill, you can end up in jail. And when you go up in jail, you're ending up there at the discretion of the judge, who may take 3, 4, 5 months to release you from jail. So when we talk about the incarceration rate and we talk about the issues with parole and probation, these are the kind of things that don't get told about. You hear somebody violated their parole and it gives the impression that they committed a crime, when in fact that wasn't the case. In the case of Meek Mill, he was popping wheelies, for crying out loud, and for some reason that was a parole violation, and the judge had gotten tired of him. This is the same judge that had sentenced him many years earlier, and obviously he was under 10 years probation, and he was under a microscope under those particular situations. And there were numerous probation violations according to the courts. Meek Mill appealed some of those decisions. The judge said, "You tried my patience, I'm tired of it," and it appeared to be a personal issue with her. But clearly, when you see the celebration on a part of his release, it's not about him, the individual, and it stops there. It's about our system of incarceration in the United States of America that people have been crying to be addressed. I'm at the game last night, and the former undisputed middleweight champion of the world, Bernard Hopkins, comes up to me and he screams in my ear, "Stephen A., there are many, many, many cases of guys being, of African Americans being incarcerated unfairly, prolonging their incarceration unfairly, and what have you. And it's something that you have a whole bunch of individuals starving and crying to be addressed." So that's one issue. The other issue is, as it pertains to Mr. Kraft and Mr. Rubin, more so Mr. Kraft, who went and visited Meek Mill in the state penitentiary, it's a heightened level of sensitivity that at least some white folks appear to have, particularly in the business of professional sports, because they communicate with these African American athletes all the time, finding on many, many occasions, most occasions, almost all occasions, that they are far more decent than they are giving credit for. And then as a result of that, you feel incentivized to look into and to delve into things a little bit deeper and to understand the heightened level of sensitivity that's emanating from our community as it pertains to this particular issue. And they want to make sure, particularly a man like Mr. Kraft, considering everything that's going on because of the whole Colin Kaepernick protest and beyond, you want to make sure to highlight that there's at least one person in the NFL, if not more, that is sensitive to the plight of African Americans and minority communities in this country, and they are not as detached from it as people would like to believe. I think that's the message that Mr. Kraft wanted to send. So that's my answer to those questions, Max.
The Meek Mill situation is about mass incarceration and criminal justice reform, to answer the question off the top. But I want to get into this a little bit. The way the human brain is wired, you hear of some disaster halfway across the world and 100 people die. That's not going to affect you as much as seeing one person affected that way. When what we see, what we experience up close, has a much greater effect than just statistics, which are abstractions to us. We need to put a face on it. And so what Meek Mill has done is put a face on it for someone like, say, Robert Kraft. And that's great because that's the way things change, in fact, not just with statistics, but with appeals to our emotion. We're emotional creatures. And so it's not just about an overzealous judge, perhaps in this case, or, you know, people really like Meek Mill. He's a talented guy with a future. What's he doing rotting in jail, right? Because let's say he wasn't a talented guy with a future, which is many people incarcerated are not talented in a way that's commercially viable, like Meek Mill, are not going to rise to the top of some profession, and maybe many don't have the potential to. And because of that, should they be rotting in prison? I mean, this is really a more important issue, in fact, than the one that Colin Kaepernick is now known for. Because police interactions and brutality with communities of color, that's a serious issue, but not as serious. Viscerally, it's an important issue to people because of what I just mentioned. You can see it. Oh, my God, in a traffic stop and someone winds up dead, and it's because of the color of their skin, many feel. That is a terrible situation, and it leaves a population in fear of the very people who are supposed to be there protecting them. So it is a very important issue, of course. But what's much more important, by any measure, is mass incarceration, and it affects communities of color disproportionately because of racism and because of the history of our country that has left a population of color in poverty at much greater levels than European Americans, right? So it disproportionately affects black people. And part of that relates to criminal justice reform, guys, because the system is set up in such a way, and forget about intention. Well, the system is set up to ensnare young black men into this. I'm not saying it's set up to do that, but that is in fact what it does. Because if you're brought up on a gun charge, in Meek Mill's case, and you like to smoke weed, and you smoke weed, what does that have to do with the gun charge? But it has you back in prison. If they test you for some reason for marijuana, and it comes up dirty, you're back in prison. Let's say you're not Meek Mill. Let's say you don't have the future, Stephen A. And by the way, maybe you're not even really looking for a job, but you know what? You're not a criminal. You're not going to go near the guns anymore. You just want to be left alone. But you're not, because there are so many stipulations placed upon your behavior that unless you comply with the law in a way that has nothing to do with what you were charged for, in very minor kind of petty ways, you will wind up back in jail, essentially in and out of jail for the rest of your life. That's what needs to be reformed. That's what Meek Mill represents.
Well, that's what he's representing right now, and there's no question about that. He may not have been representing that years ago when he violated, when he committed the crimes that they allege he committed. But nevertheless, that's certainly the case now. I think the most important thing, and the one thing that I would challenge you on, from a numbers perspective, you're absolutely right, because mass incarceration is mass incarceration, and there is no doubt about it that is a significant concern. But I would tell you this: no matter how many folks are incarcerated, are in prison, all right, falsely or not, when you look at it from the standpoint that you have innocent folks out here who happen to be minorities, who are worried about their well-being, one would argue that that is just as significant. If you're a law-abiding citizen with no criminal record, you've never been incarcerated in your life, you've never committed a crime, but just because of the color of your skin, you got to walk around and be worried about being shot and killed by a police officer. I'm sorry. As important as I believe the issue of mass incarceration is, and believe me, it is, I'm on board with that, no doubt about it, but I am not going to dilute or diminish the importance of law-abiding citizens that happen to be African Americans and minorities in this country walking around having to worry about whether or not they're going to get home safe if they get pulled over.
Police interactions with communities of color and police brutality creates a state of terror in those communities that needs to be addressed urgently.
I would know.
Which is why I supported Kaepernick, and to continue to support Kaepernick, and find it disgraceful that he's not in the NFL. Let me be very clear about that.
Okay.
But if I were to set an agenda in terms of social reform and social justice in this country, number one on my agenda would be mass incarceration in terms of the impact that it has on people of color. That would be number one on my agenda. And so when I bring up Meek Mill and compare it to the Kaepernick situation, what I'm saying is he is the face now, or symbolically, he symbolizes or puts a human face to, I think, the most important issue as it relates to race relations right now that can be addressed in a systemic way. And so perhaps he's not celebrated or discussed to the extent Kaepernick is, but in fact, I think he represents an even more important issue.
Well, I'm going to be fair, and I don't mean this in any kind of negative way whatsoever, Max, but this isn't the platform for me to get into it as deep as I want to get into it, and I'm certainly not going to debate against Max Kellerman about this particular issue. I would have to debate against somebody else from the African-American community because we are the ones that are going through that. Everybody else talks about it, but we are the one experiencing it.
But it's an important conversation, and I
appreciate
you guys
Max's
having
point.
it, both of you.
I appreciate Max's point, and I don't mean that in any kind of negative way.
And the justice system needs work. Please,
By the way,
understatement of all understatements.
By the way, when I had a Caesar, right, and I have had guns drawn by it was 6 or 8 police, guns drawn and pointed to me because of a case of mistaken identity. And so, but the difference is a European American can grow his hair out and put on a suit and tie, and that doesn't seem to happen anymore. So it is a point well taken that Stephen A. brings up. Race is tied to class in this country because of our history in a way that white people will never be able to fully understand, because even if experienced, it does not have to be experienced permanently by the white person.
So regardless of what other side you're on with Meek Mill, this is obviously shedding light on a much bigger issue. Gentlemen, we got to leave it there, though. The decision part 2. Why is tonight's Game 5 so important to LeBron's decision to stay or leave Cleveland this offseason? Max and Stephen A. will tell you why. But up next, the steal of the 2017 NFL Draft will join us, Alvin Kamara. There he is. Talks to us about his problems with Nick Saban, pulling a Jeep in his workouts, of course, the draft experience, and the New Orleans Saints. Don't go anywhere. That's next.
Roundup for Lawns has arrived to put unwelcome lawn weeds to rest. So draw the line. Roundup for Lawns is formulated to kill lawn weeds